Well, I'm gonna watch, and it's about a 10, 15 minute ride over. I gotta get there a little early. So, I'll be here for most of it, but I don't wanna get up and walk out.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Good
We're
morning.
now-
Good morning,
Good morning.
Good
We have
morning.
started YouTube, although we're not starting the class, just to make sure it's on YouTube already, so it'll just stay there. And again, want to welcome everyone. If anyone needs anything, let me know. We're going to have a great class today, a lot of fun, depending on what your view is of
No,
comic books.
If we need anything, can you help?
Oh yeah, I can help with everything.
I want to come back to services at CMI.
All right, you can do it.
Oh, God. We really miss it, I tell you.
I do too. It is, although it's nice, the technology makes it certainly much better than if we had not had the technology.
Oh,
I'll
yes.
tell you, Rabbi, Saturday service with Julian was excellent.
Oh,
I
it's
know he did
wonderful.
such a good job.
And having his cousin, Cantor Cohen, was wonderful.
I
Yes.
know. I wish everyone had a cousin who was a cantor. So it'd make it more-
Well, you can always fill in for a Cantor.
I can. You mean like fill in by taking out their trash? Fill in by carrying the music to them? So we'll see. Hey Jeff, how you doing? Sorry again about yesterday.
Well, yeah, that you weren't the only one, by the way.
That was my fault. You see, you have to, even if you sign it up for 20 times, it only does 7. You have to go in and hand sign it up for all of them for some reason. And I did not realize that. So I'll fix it for next time. So,
Well, you know,
We lost you.
those things happen. I also subscribe to Chautauqua, and they had power failures up in New York State, Connecticut, and they didn't get their show on either yesterday. So I had one after another. You're doing your the 4 clergy today?
Yeah.
And is he sending out, is the old link still good, or did he send out new links again?
I think
Or
he
did we
sent,
have
I
to
think he
rewrite
sent out a
it?
new link. I'm not sure that he sent out links. I don't know if it's a new one or similar. So that's a good question.
Because I didn't get anything that I had seen, so I was just wondering if I was having sign-up problems on that one.
I would check on my Facebook page if it's the same one you have.
Okay, I'll go into his Facebook page.
Or you can go into mine as well.
Oh, okay, fine, very good.
Welcome. Welcome. Somebody's really awesome clock is in the background.
Yeah, that's our our clock. Sid built this clock probably 55 years ago.
You built the clock from scratch?
Well, it was a kit.
Nice, that's awesome.
He put it all together, and he stained it, and it's really beautiful clock. So when we moved from our house after 35 years in our house, we started in an apartment and then to our house. My daughter said, well, I'm going to rescue the clock and take it. Well, little did we know that the clock would end up in a garage where the face got all cruddy, and so and then she moved to a house and she said, oh, well, if you want your clock back, you can have the clock back. So we did. We took it back, I suppose, about 3 or 4 years ago. And and so Sid ordered a whole new face for it.
How long did it take you to do it?
What, to order the new face?
No, to build it in the first place.
Did you build it? Oh gosh, I don't remember. I suppose a month or two. I mean,
Also, a pretty significant amount of time.
yeah, yeah, I mean, all the pieces were, I suppose, labeled. You know, but it's really, it's quite pretty.
So you can mute it for us then.
If the lawnmower service is bothering anybody, I can mute it. I can mute it.
Doing a good job. Hello, Rena.
Good morning.
Hello, Judy.
Hi, good morning. Boker
Hello, Meredith
Manishma.
or Sheila. Or doggies. I'm glad you guys are in town with her. Hope you're having a good time. Oh, no, Sheila, you're over there. That's not your car. You're on mute still. That's right. You're over there. And Rena, you are mute too. We're going to start the class in about 2 minutes. I don't know if comic books is everyone's field of expertise or interest, but you guys got to decide on what we're doing.
What are you watching in the Marvel movies? Rabbi Jeff's binge watching the Marvel movies. I think he's watched 10 already.
Oh,
we got
wow.
only 4 so far in order.
That's
We
amazing.
got the Disney thing to watch Hamilton, so he's trying to cram everything into the month.
Well, out of all 23 Marvel movies, only 4 were rated less than under 80% from Rotten Tomatoes. All 23 were above 65%. I think there were 2 around 65. 1 was 74, 1 79. All the rest were 80s and 90s, which is pretty unbelievable. They obviously decided putting money in a script was a good idea. And
So what was your favorite one?
My favorite was definitely Avengers Endgame, where they put everybody together.
That's like the last.
Oh, Jeff says that's the last one.
last of the main, third.
I know nothing about any of these movies, so.
Don't
just
worry,
letting you know.
you won't need to know anything.
Zero.
You won't need to know anything for these lessons. What we're talking about today is not the characters themselves, but why it became such a Jewish profession.
It started with
how-
Stan Lee.
Family, right?
All
The
right,
only ones
so-
I ever read were Archie's.
Yeah, me too.
Judy,
Judy.
me too.
And
I did not
Veronica.
get to mention Archie, but we can.
Hi,
Archie,
Sheila.
Hi, Rena.
How's
you like Archie
having
Bunker?
fun?
A wonderful
do.
time.
Good.
Wait.
Not what he says, but I love the show.
Archie Bunker or the Archie.
Yeah.
Archie comics, Archie Anderson? Andrews, Archie Andrews, right.
Yeah, Archie Andrews,
Veronica.
Jughead, Betty
Veronica, Betty,
Jones.
Jughead, all of them.
Betty
in
and
the
Veronica, I had them all.
Yeah.
know about Superman and,
No.
I don't think he.
Okay, so let's go ahead, and we got a nice, comfortable group here today. I hope everyone continues to be safe. Sheila, looks like you're out of town.
Yep, I'm in Maine.
Gals, yeah, I hope you're
Oh,
having a
wow.
good time. I'm sure it's a little cooler there than down here, although it hasn't been as bad as it was about a week or 2 ago. So, welcome. You do not need to know anything about comic books for what we're going to discuss today, but you may if you know this. First of all, today there are 2 main major companies, DC and Marvel. Those are the 2 big ones. And DC has 2 characters. One is Wonder Woman, you've probably heard of. Another is Captain Marvel, or also called Shazam, which you may or may not have heard of. Does anybody know, out of all the major comic book characters, what do Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel have in common?
The only women.
Jeff says the only women.
But this is the Captain Marvel who's a guy, not the
Oh,
new
the
one.
Captain Marvel, who's a guy.
Also known as Shazam.
Wonder Woman was played by an Israeli actress.
That is true.
I don't know.
Linda Carter was the original Wonder Woman.
That is true too.
But that was.
They come from the
TV.
same place?
The answer is they are the only 2 major of the characters from those two major companies that were not created by Jews.
Oh,
Wow.
The only two of the major ones were Wonder Woman and Shazam or Captain Marvel, neither of which was originally created by Jews. However, in the Shazam movie and the Wonder Woman movie, they were a Jewish actor and a Jewish actress who played the roles.
oh,
So,
That's very funny.
so Gal Gadot, of course, played Wonder Woman, but a guy named Zachary Levi played Shazam. And, but it could be Shazam or Captain. There's the comic books took after each other, so there's a Captain Marvel and the other one as well. So what we're going to talk today about is what happened to create the comic book industry and why is it such a Jewish industry? And obviously, what we're going to talk about is not just about comic books, but very similar things we've talked about in other respects. And that is, why do Jews go into certain fields? And to be honest, it's very similar to a talk we would give on Jews in Hollywood, or maybe Jews in any other field that was not considered highbrow, but more of a low-class field. So where did comics originally begin? We all know they began in the Sunday papers as comic strips. I'm sure we've all read comic strips. I know they're still in the papers, although they're obviously not as big as they used to, because obviously newspapers are not quite as widely read. But comic strips have a long history. We're not going to talk about comic strips very much. Why are we not going to talk about comic strips? Because comic strips was considered a fairly legitimate profession. Writing the comics in the newspapers was considered an all right job. You had some decent, you had to be creative, you had to be part of the whole newspaper coalition. And so why are we not talking about Jews in comic strips? Because of that exact reason. Comic strips were considered a decent job, part of the newspaper system. So who was not allowed to be a comic strip writer?
Jews.
Jews.
Right.
Fun, yes. Yes. So fun, does somebody have something to say? So funny as it is to think that comic strips were considered a highbrow, it wasn't highbrow, but it was part of the newspaper systems, and Jews were not allowed in this field. And it sounds very strange to us today that Jews weren't allowed in comic strips, but that was a fairly, I imagine, money-making industry, and certainly as part of the newspaper industry, it was very profitable. And so Jews not allowed. And so with Jews not allowed in this field, we had a problem. You had Jews who obviously were artists, struggling to find jobs, some who were actually came from families that were not wealthy, but certainly middle class, found that in the 1930s, the Depression, that they were having trouble finding jobs. And so what we see is a field that began because of the combination of Jewish writers and Jewish artists looking for jobs during the Depression, looking for jobs anywhere they can, and not being allowed to work in the comics, which is a place they probably would have gone to if allowed. In fact, there were pretty much very few or no opportunities for Jews in the general art field. So if you think of famous Jewish artists, there weren't that many. Of course, we think of one or two, and obviously Chagall is the most famous, but there weren't a lot of Jewish artists succeeding, especially because it was a field that was considered highbrow. And also, of course, because during the Depression, artists, that wasn't the greatest job in the world to have, because obviously that was not a field that was a high priority during the Depression. So what you see is a lot of frustration with young Jews who are looking for jobs, who are artists, and can't find anything in certain places, journalism, comics. And so they had to find another area. And so that's what exactly happened. Okay, so one of the other reasons is the Yiddish theater was fading. And funny enough, I read a piece that LaGuardia, who was the mayor of New York City, started an anti-porn campaign. And so all of that was sent out, and all the other arts were kind of at the bottom. And there were all these things happening, and there was an outlet that was needed. And so you're talking about people who needed jobs desperately. And so the official comic book industry was launched in 1933. Now, why is it 1933? Because a guy named Charlie Gaines, and you probably haven't heard of him, Charlie Gaines had an idea. And his idea was to take the comic strips and put them into a book form. So just take the comic strips that were in the newspapers and put them in a book form. And that's the beginning of the comics in 1933. Now, he's a nice Jewish boy. Excuse me 1 second. I think we have somebody who's having trouble getting in. Let me check. Hello, Gail. Are you having trouble getting into the class?
Hi, Rabbi. It's Gail.
Hey, are you having trouble getting into the class?
What class?
Okay, let me call you back. I'm in the middle of a class. I'll call you right afterwards.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No
Bye.
worries. So his real name was Max Ginsberg, and he started a comic book called Famous Funnies. I'm not exactly sure how he got access. He probably paid for the rights, and he made a little bit money with just taking the comics out of the newspaper and putting them in books. Now today, if you go and find Peanuts or or Calvin and Hobbes, which is my favorite, they have automatically, after they're in the funny pages, they're put into books. That's automatic, but it wasn't back then. So he started taking the comics and putting it into this comic book form. But what happened is others started doing the same thing, and there weren't enough comic strips to keep up with the need for these books. And so they had to find another way to create these comic books that would keep people interested when they would already used up all the material. And that's where the new world came from, because again, no restrictions in this field. And so it became flooded almost, not exclusively, but we're talking 80–90% with Jews, because these were immigrants or children of immigrants. They were writers, they were artists, and whether or not they consciously put in Jewish themes, subconsciously you're going to see them all over the place. So they started creating these characters, and they came up with the idea of beings that were generally superior to the beings they were. Now, we're talking before World War II. World War II will bring a whole new atmosphere. But trying to bring the belief that these generally shorter, more nebbish, more intellectual guys needed a way to fulfill their dreams of being not only equal, but even superior and welcome, or from having a secret identity, because many of them changed their names. And instead of being Jews, they became nothing. They became no religious people. They wanted just to become part of the group and hide their identities. And we all know that after a while, one comic above all set a precedent that would really continue to this day. And one comic, now remember, they're taking, at first, where are they getting all this information? They're taking it from some from like novels like Tarzan and various other novels of that sort. But in 1938, it all changed because two Jewish boys, one named Schuster, one named Siegel, created a character called Superman.
Yep.
And they created this character called Superman, which took off. Published by Gaines Comic, by the same guy who started the comic book industry. So Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created Superman. And the genre of superheroes took off. And you have all of these young guys flocking to these. So you got to remember, in the comic book industry, stealing is almost assumed. Once you have a successful character, almost exactly that character will be in another comic book, sometimes with the even same name. There's Captain Marvel. Both DC and Marvel have Captain Marvel. So these characters were just all of a sudden popping up all over the place. We only hear about the ones that lasted. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Captain America. Some of them last to this day. But for everyone that made it, there's tens and tens of them that didn't. And we're not going to go over that list, but we certainly could if we had more time. There's a whole book I bought about what were the comic superheroes that didn't make it. And some of them are really ridiculously funny. And their powers are so funny that you can understand why they didn't make it, but it's kind of fun to read about why. So they created Superman. And this led to the creation of a whole host of other ones. Now, in Superman, we find in many ways the most obvious of Jewish characters. Why is Superman Jewish? There's a couple of reasons. One, his name is Kal-El. Why is that interesting? Because El is a Hebrew biblical word for God or many gods. Have you ever heard the word Elohim? That comes from the word El, which was a non-Jewish Canaanite god that we brought the name in and made it Elohim. But it still means God in Hebrew. Ka'el can mean easy God or something akin to that. His father was Jor-El. So in other words, the name of the family was El, God. Did they do that intentionally? Nobody really knows, but obviously both of these kids did go to Hebrew school. We know that. We also know that in some of the comic books, they were using words like oy vey. Why were they using? Because these kids, they were really young. These are teenagers who are writing these books, are using words that Jews would know, but non-Jews would just think they are
Funny.
made up comic book words. Exactly. So you see them strewn throughout, especially in the beginning of comics. Now, Superman, of course, is so obviously Jewish in many ways beyond the others. First of all, the story of he is sent from a planet that is dying in a capsule to Earth. He's raised by parents who are not from his planet, who pretend that he is their child. And eventually he continues to hide his secret identity, but he comes out from the world and saves the world in many respects. Does it remind you of any Jewish character by any chance?
Moses.
Moses. It is the most obvious of all of the connections. It's the Moses story. It's not a basket, it's a spaceship. Yeah. He's not going with the Egyptians, he's going with the humans. So he is Superman, and as Moses was. You also have Jewish stories like the Golem. The Golem, of course, is created by the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Loew, to protect the Jews from those who are attacking them. So you already had this genre of super saviors that now is being put in form for young boys. And you have to remember, they were also read by men in their 20s. It eventually became a kid's form only. And then today it went back to being adult in no small respect because of the movies. But then you had young men who were reading it. You had a lot of soldiers who were reading them because, of course, eventually we're going to start go into World War II. So guess who was fighting for America in World War II? Superman. Superman is fighting the Nazis. What you needed for Superman was the ultimate villain. And guess who the villain was for a good 5 or 6 years in comic books? The Nazis. In fact, in a famous story, Joseph Goebbels himself, and we all know who he was, came across a story of Superman destroying the German line in France, or the border with France. And he tells the Fuhrer that says, he tells Hitler that Superman is Jewish and that Germans are no longer allowed to read Superman books. I kid you not. That Goebbels himself said Superman was Jewish, even though he didn't realize the creators were Jewish and probably did not know the origin story. He just saw this guy beating up the lines. Now, Superman is also an interesting character because unlike most of the superheroes, his secret identity is what? What is Superman's secret identity?
Clark Kent.
Newspaper.
His secret identity is Clark Kent. His real identity is Superman. Where every other character, Batman's real name is
Adam
Bruce
West.
Wayne.
Adam West was a character, but it's Bruce,
Bruce-
the actor.
Bruce
Wayne, and his
Wayne.
secret
Wayne.
identity is Batman.
Batman.
So Superman, real identity is the superhero, and his false identity is the mortal man. This is Jews imagining themselves as being super. And it's really astounding to see that's a comic book created in 1938 is still a phenomenon almost, 90 years later, almost 80 years later, over 80 years later. So now we have Jews flocking to this area, starting the major two. Marvel won't be one of the major two, starting these major labels. And of course, by the time, just like Hollywood, that being a cartoon artist and writer becomes a little bit more legitimate, it's too late to keep the Jews out because they're already in. And when World War II comes, you have a whole host of characters that are created to fight Nazis and be soldiers. And one of them remains today very popular, and it's no small regard again because of the movies, and that is Captain America, who was created by a rival Jewish comic book company. Eventually, he'll be bought out by Marvel because they'll name it Marvel, but you have Captain America. And you may not know the background story of Captain America, but it's even more Jewish in some ways. It's a secret program by the military to create the super soldier. They get an escaped German scientist who didn't want to be a Nazi. His name is Reinstein. Remind you of a name of anybody?
Yeah.
Reinstein comes up with a serum to make a super soldier. They tested on a very weak, sickly boy. He becomes Captain America, but then Reinstein is assassinated and they don't have the formula anymore. and thus Captain America is the only one with this super serum. Can you think of any boys during the Depression who might have been smaller and weaker and not allowed to play sports like the other kids? Maybe Jewish boys. So whereas Superman was Moses, Captain America is the regular Jewish boy who wants to take the serum and not only be like other people, but be even better, be adored. And Captain America becomes a sensation during World War II, as he is, of course, fighting who? He's fighting the Nazis. Of course, he's Captain America. And so you have others, of course, that are fighting Captain America. You probably haven't heard of them, a Submariner. There's a couple others as they try different ones. Batman will, of course, as well be fighting the Japanese. In fact, in the 40s, the first creation of Batman in the movies is a cereal. You guys remember the cereals that they played before the pictures?
Sure.
So there's a cereal. The first one of Batman is a serial in which he is trying to stop a secret Japanese plot to take over America. And if you watch it, you're amazed at how politically incorrect it is because of all the references to Japanese, because obviously you can make any reference because they're the enemy in a war. So you can say whatever you want about them. So a lot of things we would not say today about them are said throughout the entire thing, including a lot of terrible stereotypes. What are some of the other words used in these comics? A famous word used is Ganef. What is a Ganef?
Thief.
Thief, exactly. A Ganef is used very often as the bad guy or as the thief. And that is also obviously, just so you see Yiddish, you see Jews owning comics, but also being the comic writers. Now you have to also understand, if you created a comic, you did not own the rights to it. The company owned the rights. Schuster and Simon, how much did they make for creating Superman? $130.
Oh,
They sued later and got a little bit of money, but Bob, the guy who created Batman, did not make a lot of money from Batman. So again, because there were all of these comics being made and some of them became popular, but only a few of them lasted until this, it lasted for years and years.
Rabbi, can you mute everybody?
Oh, sorry, is it too loud? Sorry, let me mute everybody again. All right, sorry. So it's incredible to see this industry continued to thrive with an almost exclusive Jewish influence. And remember, a lot of these guys were supporting their families by working 17 hours a day, writing comics, as many as they could, because it was a great way to make money. You were making very decent money if you're writing them nonstop. They're just being churned out one after the other. And so, except for, again, those two comic strips, Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, all of them are written by Jews, or all the best ones, and most of the ones that weren't great. So it's a great industry. It's again, a very good example of an industry that was completely open. And so Jews were able to go into it. And when World War II came in, it was perfect because you could have these Jewish created superheroes fight the Nazis. So it was a great Jewish inspiration to have the ultimate bad guy. And so you could take ideas such as Tarzan and Buck Rogers from the new strip and create all of these new characters. Now, by the 50s, the popularity started to wane. We can understand why. The war is over. You've had comics for 20 years or 15 years. You start to lose ideas. And so when they start to fall out a little bit, first of all, there's a change in the 50s that helps sustain them. And that is when a lot of these superheroes begin to be banned because of a lot of the restrictions now being placed on the industry. If a superhero, for instance, can be connected to a communist, or if these superheroes are doing things that different organizations and Congress didn't like, they started to restrict them. And so they started coming out with other comics like Mad Magazine, which is all comedy, like horror stories. And these other comic strips started to become very popular in the 50s. Now, there are tons of them, obviously, and some of the comic strips also made their way into the radio shows. And so the weights, most of the Jewish comic book guys were not making tons of money, but some of them were doing well. But in the 50s, you started having all of these different types of horror comics. Archie's had been around a long time, but Archie continued its popularity. I think that's one of the longest running continuous in-service comics, as somebody mentioned. Mad Magazine is interesting because it is created by Charlie Gaines. If you recognize Gaines, William Gaines is the publisher who started the comic book industry. He dies and leaves it to his son, who is considered kind of a little bit of a loser, and starts all these alternative comic books that they think is going to ruin the industry or the company. It actually does very well, especially Mad Magazine, which is completely Jewish and uses a lot of Yiddish and is illustrated by Jews, and so it really does well. So if you look at the comic books of Superman and Captain America, this is considered the golden age of comics. That's the first major age, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And that is characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, later The Flash, Green Lantern. So these have all had motion pictures made about them or have been part of motion pictures. But the comic book industry, especially the superhero industry, was waning. Comics like Mad Magazine and Archie's were actually doing fairly well in the 50s. So what happened was the next age of comics, and that would be called the Silver Age or the Marvel Age. And those are the ones we're seeing in the movies today. When you hear the 23 movies that are part of Marvel, it begins in 1961. Now, why is 1961 important? Because in 1961, 3 Jewish boys are pretty much giving up on comic industry and are going to go into another field, decide to take one last stab, and 2 of them, a guy named Stan Lee, who just recently died. You may have heard of him. He's the most famous. He also worked with another guy called Jack Kirby. And these 2 guys, as they're about to leave the industry, are asked by the head of one of the comic book companies to do something. And they asked them, can you create a comic book team? Because we're competing with another comic book team from the other company from DC. They have a comic book team called the Justice League that is consistent of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and the Flash. And their books are outselling any of our individual hero books. Can you come up with a hero team that will compete with them? And in 1961, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby restart the comic book industry. Does anybody know the team they create? If you have this first comic, it is worth a lot of money. I think it's certainly over $100,000. It's called the Fantastic Four. Now you have to remember, The characters in the comics are not going to be Jewish until the 70s and 80s. But I mean, they're not going to be named as being Jewish characters, even though they're based on Jewish characters. Now, why does the Fantastic Four do so well? It's a new brand of comics. Why is it new? Because the other comics are about amazingly talented, superior people who are pretending to be even more superior. It's about billionaire Bruce Wayne who fights crime at night. It's about a really super nice reporter named Clark Kent who is Superman. It's about a beautiful woman named Diana Queen or Diana Prince who becomes Wonder Woman and changes a costume. Kirby and Lee said, well, why don't we create heroes that are a little bit messed up? And so he creates the Fantastic Four. One of the characters is called the Thing. Have you ever heard of the Thing?
Yes.
Yes.
He's a big
Yes.
yellow rock monster.
Right.
By the way, he is Jewish in the comics, but we don't find this out till later. And so he has a lot of issues. He has an anger problem. Why? Because he's stuck as a rock monster. Who wants to be stuck as a rock monster? So on one hand, he's saving people. On the other hand, he's upset with his powers, unlike Superman, who is super. There's also a great line in one of the comics where the Thing, this yellow granite good guy, is fighting like this mutant green bad guy. And they're fighting, and it comes up that the Thing is Jewish. And the green mutant guy says, "You're Jewish?" And the yellow granite guy says, "Yes." And the green guy then says, "Funny, you don't look Jewish." Obviously, because he's a yellow granite guy. So it's a takeoff on the very famous thing we've all been told 100 times. They create a man who can stretch his arms, but he's got a lot of issues because he's dating and his best friend has become a bad guy, but a serious bad guy. He's dating a woman who can turn invisible, and they have real life problems. Plus, they are beloved though. So they create another character, and this time it's even bigger. So they've created this incredible team. Then they create the most popular character in all of Marvel history. The most popular character in DC will be Superman. The most popular character is a boy named Spider-Man. So after they create the Fantastic Four, they hit pay dirt again, creating something even more popular. Why do you think Spider-Man becomes so popular? It's kind of similar to Captain America, except it's a skinny, geeky guy who is picked on in school and likes science. Does it remind you of anybody you know? The geeky, unpopular kid who's picked on by the football player. And when he gets his superpower, it's a weird superpower, and you really can't tell from the outside he hasn't gotten he's gotten muscular, but he stays skinny. Not only that, when he is Spider-Man, the football player who picks on him, guess who the football player's hero is? Spider-Man. So not only is he stronger than the football player idolizes him. However, what happens to Spider-Man that does not happen to Captain America or the Fantastic Four or Superman or Wonder Woman? He is not loved. The newspapers hate him. The newspaper reporter makes him public enemy #1 because he's trying to sell newspapers. And it's a very complicated story about a teenage boy who's dealing with all the teenage issues, trying to, date girls and be popular and make good grades, even though he is pretending to be Spider-Man. What's another issue? When he's Spider-Man and he's being Spider-Man all day and night, what can he not do? He can't work for a living. He's a poor boy, not poor, but the family's just barely making a living. So he needs to find a way to work, go to school, and be Spider-Man. And he's always having trouble managing these three, whereas the other superheroes never did. And it makes it a very difficult and messy life. And this is what Spider-Man does to the industry. He gives especially young kids and young men a hero just like them, balancing a ton of things at one time. His powers are awkward. He sticks to walls. And he has super strength, but he can't fly. He creates web shooters, so he is swinging around. It's a whole new hero. And so they create a whole class of other heroes. They create the Incredible Hulk, who's a guy who has anger issues and becomes a giant monster who can't talk. All I can say is Hulk is mad, Hulk mad, and he crushes things. So when he's angry, he becomes this so they're all scientists, by the way. The Hulk in real life is Bruce Banner, a scientist. Spider-Man in real life is Peter Parker, a scientist. And so the Hulk has all these emotional issues, and then they create the most Jewish of all the heroes. And this becomes the X-Men. Have you ever heard of the X-Men? Also
Yes.
movies.
Yeah.
This becomes later, especially the epitome of Jews. It is a group of people who have a different gene, an extra gene. So they're using science, and this extra gene gives them superpowers. And they are not beloved. They are considered very different, and they're ostracized. And the government tries to get all of their names and isolate them and use them for their own. And so they're persecuted. And some of these mutants want to fight the government and kill human beings, and others want to protect human beings. And so the good mutants are always fighting the bad mutants, even though sometimes they're friends and they're just like each other. And it's this very convoluted thing. Later, it turns out the greatest of the bad mutants, his name is Magneto, played in the movies by, what's his name? I just forgot his name. Very famous actor, which of course I just forgot. The first one is played by Ian McKellen, and I figured that out before by the way, I figured that out before it came up. Just want you to know. And he is a bad guy. He has complete power over any type of metal. He is one of the strongest bad guys. He's best friends with the leader of the good guy, Charles Xavier, who has mind control powers and can people. Why does he so upset that the humans are trying to gather up all the mutants? Because he is a survivor of the death camps. He was a child during the Holocaust and survived and saw his family killed in the Holocaust. And now he does not want humans to do that to mutants. And so you see how convoluted it can be, because you might understand what he's doing, but you don't support him killing people. So these are much more complicated stories with much more real superheroes dealing with issues. They're going to bring in African-American heroes, female heroes having issues, and it becomes a much thicker, much more nuanced world. And in the 70s, these characters are even free to become Jewish. And the Thing is Jewish. Magneto is Jewish. Probably one of the most popular women characters, her name is Kitty Pryde, is Jewish. She even wears a Star of David necklace. So what they did is, once they were doing this, the other comic books had to create these stories as well, and it became much more nuanced. And this is what led to the modern comic book industry and all the movies, is having civil rights. The mutants are looking for civil rights, as are the African American comic book heroes. So they brought in popular culture. There's a very famous comic in which Superman gets into a boxing match with, guess who? Who's the most famous boxer of all time? Muhammad Ali. Superman fights Muhammad Ali in a comic book. So they bring real life issues and into the comic book world. And it's really interesting to see how this completely changes, but then it changes again, because they start creating something called the graphic novel. Have you ever heard the term graphic novel? It's like a book-bound comic book with a long story, that has the artwork, but also real, more literature type writing. You can also take the artwork out and make it just into a book. And the graphic novels start to become very popular and very interesting, because, as you know, in a book form, you can do a lot. And the first one is one called A Contract with God. And that is one of the first, if not first, graphic novel by a guy named Will Eisner, who may be the most famous of all comic book artists. And his first graphic novel is called A Contract with God. It's about a pious Jew who renounces his faith when his daughter dies. And then another very popular graphic novel is by a guy named Harvey Pekar, who becomes very famous. He's a Jewish file clerk in Cleveland. And what does he do that is so super? He chronicles the minutia of his daily life. And it becomes a major hit called An American Splendor. Becomes a major movie. But funny enough, one of the female leads in the current comic book superheroes was the lead in American Splendor, Scarlett Johansson, who is actually Jewish as well. And so these comics become dealing with actual issues of the day. Not only that, one of the most famous, if not the most famous of all graphic novels, is written in the mid-'80s by a guy named Art Spiegelman.
Oh, yeah.
And it's called Moss. And it is a phenomenal success. It's actually 92 is when it was printed. It's so successful that it becomes the first graphic novel or comic book to win the Pulitzer Prize. It's about the Holocaust, and the mice are the Jews and the Germans are the cats. And many of you may have read this. It's used in schools around the world, not only religious schools, but in actual schools that have Holocaust programs often use this. It's probably the preeminent book used for this for kids. And so how many of you ever read that one? You may have read that one. So the industry changes in some ways people don't like. Obviously, there's some lewd comics. It becomes a lot more descriptive in some ways.
Rabbi, what's the name of that?
Moss. It's spelled M-A-U-S.
Oh, M-A-U.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and there's actually 2 parts. I would highly recommend it if you've never read it. It is a wonderfully poignant book written for kids, but for adults as well. So when you read it, you can see why it was so well received, because it's also something that adults can read with their kids, and that when kids are reading it in schools, and Holocaust curriculums, it really sparks their interest a lot more than just a regular book would.
Rabbi, I don't know if everybody understands like that. Like in Mouse, it's the actual panes of the comics. It's not, there's no, the type, it's like, I think they're like 4 on a page, if I remember
Right.
right.
Right,
But, so it's actually a box with the comic and the
right. It's
what do you call it? The little cloud that they're talking.
Right.
It's not-
and
don't read
that's how the graphic novel works.
Yeah, I
Graphic
didn't know. I
novel-
didn't know.
Yeah, the graphic
didn't-
novel often has the bubble where you speak, and that's how that's how comic book often works as well. Not that I've read any in my life, because obviously I'm a rabbi.
Rabbi, oh,
I don't do
sorry.
that kind of stuff.
Rabbi,
Rena.
what age group is it for kids? What are we talking about? The age
Mouse
group?
could probably be for 5th, 6th grade and up.
Okay.
That may, that's probably the earliest you want to do it. Yes,
Okay.
Sheila. You're on mute, Sheila. Here.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay.
Sheila, you are on still mute. I think.
Okay. Am I
okay,
unmuted?
Yeah.
When I retired, I had a part-time job in an inner city school in Rhode Island, and I was a reading specialist. So of course I was dealing with inner city kids who were non-readers. And I formed a library, and a big portion of the library were graphic novels.
Yeah.
It was amazing because these kids couldn't wait to take the next book. And in the morning, I used to have other kids lined up at my door who were not non-readers. Mrs. Weinberg, please, can I come in and take some of your books? Because it took off like, and I didn't care what they read. And I told the principal, he said, Sheila, you can buy them. But a lot of them were very graphic.
Yeah, you have to figure out.
Sexual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So graphic
Yeah.
novels does not mean they're all graphic, because you can have Archie and Jughead graphic
Yeah,
novels, which
yeah.
they have. It's just a compilation in book form. Some of them can be very graphic,
Very.
and some of
yeah.
them are very kid friendly. So don't just, you buy what some of them become very, you have Batman becomes very dark. You have a very famous one called The Watchmen, which is on Time Magazine's 100 books of the 20th century you must read. And that's it's about what would superheroes really be like, and all the, psychosis that would be involved. But then you also have recently a novel that was written about the early comic book industry that also won the Pulitzer Prize. Now, it's not a comic book, but it's a book about 2 comic book writers. I just actually read another book by the same writer. It's called the Yiddish Policemen's Union. But Michael Chabon wrote The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. It's about 2 kids who come to America from Europe who are penniless and enter into the comic book industry. Also combines the Golem into it. I actually like the Yiddish Policemen's Union better, but the Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, both those books I would recommend. So if
They
you
were
want
very
to,
good books, Rabbi. I
Yeah.
read them. Excellent.
if you want to read anything on the comic book industry, you could read, there's a couple books on the comic book industry, but the novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, I would recommend. Yes, Flossie.
Very interesting. A woman called Louise Borden. Can you hear me? They're cutting
can.
our grass, so it's very loud here. Sorry. Wrote, I'm sure most of you know when your kids were growing up, Curious George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She wrote a book, The Journey That Saved Curious George. She and her husband escaped the Nazis, and this book tells how they escaped Paris on a bicycle with the Curious George manuscript. They carried
Wow.
it out of France.
Yeah.
And so I never knew Curious George was Jewish.
I did not either. But I do have the book Curious George Hanukkah. I have that book.
Well, tell
Right.
your children that the people who wrote it,
Nice.
what they did to get it out of Germany.
Now, not only do comics leave the pages of the comic strips and go into comic books, they eventually leave and go into radio and, of course, movies and TV. And we're not going to talk about this, obviously, because we don't have time. Today, we're just talking about comic books. But if you go into the comics on TV, especially Bugs Bunny and those kinds, a lot of the creators are Jewish, and a lot of the voices, funny enough, are Jewish. And who was it here? One of you just told me recently, like Yosemite Sam is actually Jewish. It's from Yosemite. Yosemite. And that was how he came to Yosemite Sam. I just want to make sure, because I didn't know that. But obviously,
I heard somebody pronounce the name of the park like that yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's awesome. Obviously, Mel Blanc is the most famous of the voices, and he was Jewish. Walt Disney is he's got a stereotype as being an anti-Semite, but there's a lot of proof that he wasn't as well. It could go either way. It's not like Lindbergh or Henry Ford. He's often put as one of the three great anti-Semites, but that is not a for sure deal. And there's a lot of debate as to whether so, because he did employ, especially in the cartoons and the artists and the voices were Jewish in a lot of them. Any thoughts or questions before we conclude? All right. So again, comic books are not for everyone, but we can say that certainly it is one of the industries that was most Jewish in its inception. Hollywood be another. Comic books maybe even more so than even Hollywood, because again, it was a very lowbrow, poorly thought of, not even invented world yet. And they entered it because it became an open field. Comic strips was a place they couldn't go, part of the newspaper system. And so they invented comic books, which at the beginning was, of course, many of us have known, not a very big deal. It was selling, you weren't making a lot of money, but you were making money and you could make a decent living sometimes. And then, of course, it took off and became the industry it is today. A lot of the writers of the comic book movies are Jewish, but it's by no stretch of the imagination a purely Jewish field anymore. But there's still a lot of writers and artists in the comic book world, a lot of the actors even, and in the actual movies and television, and also the writers of the actual comic books are still Jewish. If you want to read any comics, again, I would say Mouse would be the #1. A book would be The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier Clay. If you seriously want to get into the comic book and see some of the more, difficult ones to read, the ones that really start, set off the comic book industry, you would start with the original Spider-Man. Obviously, you can't get an original copy. It's worth an incredible amount of money. The original Fantastic Four, The Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns. That's about Batman coming back from retirement. Those are some of the ones. The Spirit, which is a very popular 40s one. You have things like The Lone Ranger. I mean, they're all over the place. So again, it's not a field for everyone. The movies, of course, have made it very popular because they've been very well written, and you add special effects, and the comic movies have done something similar to what comic books did. Comic books took comic strips and lengthened them into more book form with long narratives. And that's what the recent Marvel movies did. They took 23 movies and connected 23 movies. Later it'll become 24 and more coming, and they connected them all together. So each movie is connected. You don't have to watch all of them, but they're all connected, and that's what the comic books did. The more you read, the more you would see the connections. So it's a really interesting, fascinating place. Again, it's an interesting thing, not everybody read, but there's a couple books out there. There's one really good book about the invention of the comic book, and I just forgot the name of it. I'll get it to you 1 second. It's from Krakow to, I forgot the name. I can look it up. I have it right over here. Does anybody know the name? There's been a lot of also from Krakow to Krypton, Jews in comic books. And there's been a lot of exhibitions around the world for it. Just in case you're wondering, by the way, somebody said they loved reading Archie. Was created by Jews, just in case you're wondering. That became the number one comic for a long time. Yes, Rena?
What was the name of the person that created Archie? Do you know?
Oh, I just had that up there. Yes, I had it. I just forgot his name. Let me look it up. You have to go on Wikipedia for that. I just forgot it. Sorry. It was the number one comic for a long time. And let's see here, is created
It's
by.
funny because the kids were so all-American and so un-Jewish.
Exactly. And it really, it's created at the same way that the movies created all the movies that were written by Jews and produced by Jews were about creating an America for everyone. That's what happened with Archie Comics. And in fact, they were the basis for the Andy Hardy movies that of course starred Mickey Rooney, although I don't think Mickey Rooney was Jewish.
No.
Nor Judy Garland.
No.
No, she was not, but we'll take
not.
her. Okay, and it was, I think, it was founded by Maurice Cohn, Louis Silberkleit, and John L. Goldwater. I think they.
Wow. Rabbi, I don't know if anybody else, a couple of people here.
Oh, the initial ones, those are the initial ones were John Goldwater, Bob Montana, and Vic Bloom.
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up in the Bronx, right? And we had candy stores. And I'm sure Ron and Arlene are aware of that. And I would go in there every Saturday and I really only read Veronica and Archie most of the time, but I would get comic books and it was like a thrill for me. Every week I would go in there and read those comic books. My kids collected them and they were gone in a flood, unfortunately. They had some that were worth something, but we had a flood and unfortunately that's what happened.
Rabbi.
Yeah. Yes, Arlene.
Yes, my father, when I was growing up, actually when I was 13, my father bought a candy store in Patterson. So I had the, from the neighborhood, I had the biggest comic book collection around.
Really?
Wow.
And I saved them for years. I had all kinds of comic books, Mad magazines when they came out and everything else. And that's what you did. We all had comic books and we traded each other.
Right.
Yeah, and again, some of them are not worth anything, but some of them are. It generally follows the same rule as baseball cards or sports cards.
That's right.
The most valuable is the number one. And so if you have a number one Spider-Man, not an original, you're talking an incredible amount of money, just like if you have a number one rookie card for Mickey Mantle. Yeah, you're talking about a lot of money. Most comic books are not worth anything. Obviously, it depends on how much, how many were made. But the first Spider-Man sold, I know, for over $1 million. I know it's probably even more now. So they just don't come up that often. So if you have a first Spider-Man, what you do is you get the secure packet, the clear, what do you call it? Binder. You put it in there, and then you give me a call, and then I come and pick it up. That's what you do with that. Same thing with baseball cards. But it's a really interesting place. I mean, some people think it's silly. Again, in the 50s, they were banned as being un-American. And other times they've been considered too graphic. And other times some people think they're great. Archie was consistently for decades one of the best sellers. So actually comedy can continue on for a long time, whereas superheroes kind of go in and out of fashion, although they're very big today. So any other questions before we conclude? First, Jeff?
Yes, Rabbi. I wish you had recorded this. I didn't see any recording button on there.
I'm not recording it here because it's being recorded on YouTube.
Oh, great, because I know, like Larry, it's probably without power up in New Jersey, so he didn't see this.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we were recording him on Zoom, but then to take it from Zoom to YouTube later is a lot of work, so we just recorded straight to YouTube now.
And we will have to have a talk in the near future about Lindbergh. I
Yeah.
know you mentioned him as one of the great anti-Semites, but in actuality, he was.
May not have been, right. And that is one of the other, we didn't get to that. Henry Ford, though, definitely was.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not talking about Henry Ford.
Yeah, but Lindbergh is considered, in fact, there was a book, a very famous book written about it, but was he? He's definitely considered more than Disney, but was he or wasn't he? There's a lot of debate.
Well, well, I could tell you a lot of reasons why Lindbergh was, but there've been some very good historical books written on that also. And you got to remember his best friend in life was Annenberg, who actually sheltered him after the kidnapping of his child. But that's a long discussion another day.
But there was also, who wrote the book about Lindbergh becoming president? I read it. Philip Roth.
Philip Roth,
Roth,
but
the plot.
that is
Very
it's highly fictionalized, of course.
Right.
It's like,
The Plot Against America.
right, The
That was
Plot
good.
Against America, but, you know, that was based on a character, well, okay.
But even that book did not make Lindbergh look out to be as anti-Semitic as you'd think.
No, it did not.
He was more accidentally put in a position he didn't feel comfortable, as opposed to being a horrible person.
Correct.
There was a TV series, Plot Against
Made it
America.
Yeah, I heard it's very
that was
good.
Based on the novel, and
It's on
it was
HBO.
okay. It was like, I think 5 nights, 10 hours.
I haven't seen it
It was
yet.
okay.
All right, any other thoughts? So thank you again for joining us here. It's so much fun. Again, we get a few people here, but then of course, more people are free to watch on YouTube later. So that makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Now, as for our next class, again, sometimes we change them because we do different things. We had some of the ideas were Jewish authors, I think was what we had next, but we can go to other things if we don't, or Jewish comedians or something like that. What do you guys would like for next time? Yeah, so next we have Jewish authors, Jews in Vegas, Jewish comedians, Jews in Congress. We could do Jewish cartoon artists as well in terms of movie as in TV. Any thoughts on any of those?
No.
This one was a lot of fun, so why don't you choose the next one?
You want to do Jewish comedians next?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, we'll do Jewish comedians next.
Didn't we
Maybe
do
you can
that
have
last
starring
week?
role.
Last week we did Jews in movies. Now we're going to talk about the stand-up comedians.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like the Marvelous Miss Maisel, as opposed to actors and
Right.
all right, cool.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
this is the one, bring your jokes, bring your Jewish jokes for next week.
All right.
And we'll let you tell some of your Jewish jokes, and we'll talk about some of the and you can also bring your own stories, because all of us have our own personal stories of seeing comedians either live or on TV. And again, it's a very different way of seeing it. So I also have 2 shows this week, just letting you know. So, I'm doing a show for the Houston group, and so another one. So back on the saddle, making big bucks as a comedian. I plan to make on my 2 shows this weekend this much money. Well, actually negative, minus the drive to one of them. So you guys stay safe.
Thank
And
you.
Thank
always
you.
a pleasure, guys. Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye, guys.
Good seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Rabbi, did you
Yes,
get what
Felicity.
I sent you?
Oh, yes, I did. I just
Okay, I thought you.
both the message and the link.
Okay, no, I thought that your friends, your cronies this afternoon might find that funny too.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give him any material. It's up to me.
Okay, be
Yeah,
well.
you know, the interesting thing, Rabbi, about Lindbergh,
Yeah.
he was always accused of being anti-Semitic, but people never mentioned the fact that he was a bigamist. And
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, he had 3 wives at one time, so,
I didn't realize he had 3 wives at one time.
but, the American wife, of course, was the famous one. But later on, after his death, it came out they had a couple of German wives and a couple of German children. And it was all proven by DNA also.
I think
Nice.
it was Lindbergh. I don't know.
Never heard that before.
I am not either.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Flossie, by the way, I'm also an insult comedian, so that was a very helpful,
It's from a church in our area. I didn't create it, but I
Yeah.
thought it.
I'm ever late to a show, I can say that because I insult the audience. Sorry, I'm late, but I didn't want to spend time with you, something like that.
Okay, hope I can get on to your 3 o'clock show today.
So
So,
you want me to send you the link?
yeah, I would appreciate that
If I
just
have
in
it.
case, and just in case the Reverend changed it.
Yeah, and again, let me double check because let me make sure I have the right link because I have a different link because I go on as a participant but I'll send it to you right now what I have.
Okay,
Ron,
thank you.
Ron, you should go on what we're talking about with the rabbi. He's with 3 other clergymen and it's wonderful.
I don't know. if I'm-
I should go on with them?
To listen.
No,
No, no.
no, tune it in.
Watch it.
Oh, I thought you wanted me to introduce everybody.
Oh, they introduce themselves.
They do a fine job.
It's wonderful. It's 3 o'clock.
Rabbi, send us the link also.
I'll send it to you as well, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care,
Hello,
bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Hello? Hi, Susan. Perfect timing. I just finished the class. Again, my condolences. Oh, are you okay? Everything okay? Oh, that's right, because I should have told you that because often they can't find at the National Cemetery. Sometimes that happens. Have they figured out a day they can do it? Okay, that'll be fine. I can do Monday at 2 o'clock. No new day, so. Okay. Well, the good thing is they have it's in a little outdoor area where they have a roof. You can only do it's only 30 minutes. That's all they allow you to have. And so it'll be very, they do a nice job there. No, you won't. I'll go over everything. You want to set up a time to go over everything? I can do it. Yeah, I can do it right now for a little bit if you'd like. Can I call you? Let me call you.
Why not?
I'm going to call you on a different number because I don't hear as well in my office from this phone for a long discussion. So I'm going to hang up. If you don't mind, I'll call you right back.
Okay, it is 843-707-9215.
All right, this is me. Hello, sorry about that. This is much better for me. And plus I can put on my headset so I can type anything I need. Right, so what we need to do, is what we need to do is first is we have the time set, and then we'll go over the funeral and how it works. And then I'll answer any questions about everything you have, all right? So first of all, it's a shorter funeral, but the funerals in Judaism, that's okay because they're generally very short anyway. Yeah, so you know, we basically we say a few passages from the Bible. We say two prayers, the prayer for someone who just died and prayer for people who died in the past. So one is called El Melech Rachamim, one is called Kaddish. And if somebody wants to give a chesped, a eulogy, we do that as well. And so would you like to go over it step by step? Okay. Yeah, but I can also, you know, call her and we can talk to her about how she wants to do it. Also, what I would do is make sure the funeral home video streams it, because all of them can do that now because the restrictions, a lot of them are doing it. Yeah, so whoever, yeah, no, but they'll stream it at the cemetery. And almost all of them do it now because of the, obviously because of the virus. Okay. Just putting this, I'm just writing all the notes down so I don't forget. Do you want to set up a time where we can do a conference call, or we can do a Zoom, whatever technology you feel comfortable with? You want to call me back and set up another time later? The most important thing is to get the time set. Once that's set, everything else we can do later. What do you want to wait till you know they can do it? Because I want to make sure that we can do a conference call, or do you want to just set it? You want to set it up first and then call them? So. Yeah, it just depends on the time. So. Yeah, so yeah, and then we can just set up. I don't want to set. You know, it's probably better not to just have the time where they may not be able to do it. Oh, perfect. And by the way, before I forget, did you know his Hebrew name? If not, no worries. I'll just put that down before I forget. If not, just Yiddish is the same thing, yeah. Is it, you know, his father, was it Yankov Beryl or Yankov Ben Beryl? Okay. All right, you know, and if you can find his father's Hebrew name, or just let me know, because that'll be part of it. But anything you need, just give me a call, okay? Yeah, you know, that's what I'll just say. It's no rush. I don't. That would be part of it, yeah. Someone who's descended from the original Aaron, and the way you know you're Cohen is a very technical way. Your father says you're Cohen. So my father said I was a Levi because his dad told him, and his dad told him. Somewhere along the way, somebody could have just said, you know what, I think I'm going to be a Levi. Why not? I'm going to America. I'll be a Levi. I'll be a big shot. So there's no way to prove that you're a Cohen. Right. Yeah. I mean, I can say I'm a Cohen now, and nobody would, you know. So some people now that does insult some people because they think they are, and they possibly are, but you know, you can't prove by blood.